The apparent result of parthenogenesis, Anakin Skywalker was an unprecedented anomaly, possessing the all-time greatest Force potential with a midichlorian count north of 20,000 per cell. His innate sensitivity expressed itself from an early age through prophetic dreams, precognition in the cockpit, and a deep affinity for machines. Discovered by Master Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin was accepted into the Jedi Order at age 9. Despite the Council's reluctance to recruit students any older than infants, and was directly trained by the recently knighted Obi-Wan Kenobi. Skywalker specialized as a Jedi Guardian, specifically emphasizing augmented strength and reflexes to enable his dedication to lightsaber combat, and coming into his own as an ace pilot, but ultimately coasting on talent rather than truly applying himself. Anakin Skywalker's career as a Jedi Knight was ultimately defined by the Clone Wars, his horrific experiences quietly eroding his morals and radicalizing his views. His existing loyalty to Supreme Chancellor Palpatine and his possessive love of his wife Padme Amidala allowed Darth Sidious to manipulate Anakin into defecting to the Sith, taking the name Darth Vader. Vader commenced the Jedi Purge by cleansing the Temple, and ended the Clone Wars by butchering the Separatist Council before suffering his catastrophic defeat at Obi-Wan Kenobi's hand. Though his survival amounted to a minor miracle, the loss of so much of his living tissue to burns and amputation crippled Darth Vader's Force potential, and the sensitive cybernetic implants disallowed the use of various powers. This limitation expressed itself most directly through the Control Branch, with Lord Vader's affinity for various foundational abilities being badly reduced. His cumbersome prosthetics and armor forced him to completely change his application of Force enhancement, employing Force speed, Force jump, and Dark Rage in calculated bursts, as the dynamic footwork and acrobatics that characterized his fighting style as a Jedi was no longer sustainable. Though capable of effecting temporary dark side healing maintained by continuous rage, sustaining himself for days while buried alive, Vader failed to permanently regenerate his lungs, the joy and relief he experienced when breathing freely disrupting his Dark Force focus. The delicate electronics of his life support restricted his use of energy-based powers. Though capable of deflecting blaster bolts with Tutaminis, he was incapable of safely channeling Force lightning. However, as Darth Vader typically served as a military enforcer and Jedi hunter, his weaknesses rarely came up, but his viability against opposing Darksiders was severely reduced. Though Lord Vader's ability with classical Sith powers of energy manipulation and sorcery was effectively crippled, he proved capable of accessing the powers of various Force artifacts and other anomalies through mere proximity. When he encountered the Myrrh Talisman, Vader used its Sith magic to mutate Dr. Fane Patori into a Rakghoul. When he inserted the last remaining sample of Boda into his chest piece for analyses, he inadvertently unleashed an uncontrolled Force storm. When pursuing the Kyber crystal on Mimban, the power he drew from it allowed him to generate a kinetite blast, though at the cost of undermining his self-control. Lastly, Vader possessed one of the indestructible Sith Amulets of Lord Khan, incorporating it into his right-hand gauntlet. Though the exact properties of this artifact are unknown, my educated guess is that it enhanced telepathic influence, based on Khan's accomplished use of mental manipulation to control his Sith followers. Though initially driven by a narrow obsession with hunting Jedi, Darth Sidious encouraged Lord Vader to turn his focus to greater things, using ambitious acts of cruelty to instill fear on a grand scale. In one-to-one combat against Jedi, Vader followed the Sith tradition of Dun Mok and pursued the domination of his opponent's spirit. This tactic was enabled by his largely undiminished sensibilities, using invasive telepathy to provide ammunition for verbal taunts, goading and manipulating opponents. Furthermore, he occasionally delivered these barbs via projective telepathy, in addition to outright dominating the minds of subjects. He continued to employ the Jedi mind trick and beast trick, and his successful ambush of Luke Skywalker suggested an ability to cloak his Force signature. Furthermore, though he failed to dispel Jax Pavin's pyronium-powered Force illusions, he learned to recognize them almost immediately. However, his influence could be resisted by strength of will, and he failed to overcome the telepathic immunity of Toydarians, and he accepted his complete helplessness against the equivalent powers of his master. It is in the Altar branch where I believe Darth Vader made his greatest strides as a Darksider, compensating for his inability to generate Force lightning by doubling down on his use of telekinesis. His maximum lifting strength was several hundred tons, sufficient to tear starships out of the sky. His raw kinetic output was sufficient to explosively shatter stone, and he could reliably overcome the defensive barriers of opposing Force adepts, with only Council Master level assailants proving to be his match. His range of applications included devastating Force pushes and waves, both ranged and tactile, brutal telekinetic strangleholds and organ crushers, sustained barrages of thrown objects, precise lightsaber throws, and protective Force shields. Darth Vader's overall application of his Force abilities demonstrated his emphasis on raw power, his personal philosophies emphasizing the domination of others and the imposition of order. In combat, he used telekinesis to support his strategy of herding and grinding down opponents, weaponizing the environment by bringing down the walls, floor, and ceiling while battering them with loose objects, actively creating a terrifying spectacle. However, though utterly ruthless and prone to bloodthirst, Vader refrained from malicious cruelty and did not kill for pleasure, ultimately conducting himself cautiously and conservatively. The advantage of Vader's emphasis on psychological warfare and fear tactics is that, when successfully implemented, they compromise the opponent's ability to bring their own powers to bear against him. Darth Vader has successfully manhandled Coffee Arana, Sui Choi, Sha Kun, Chona Bene, Celeste Morn, Kento Merrick, Ram Koda, Galen Merrick, and the Starkiller clone, and he's successfully beaten down Rowan Shrine, Anya Kuro, and Luke Skywalker. Vader himself has only been overcome by the combined powers of Jastus Far, Sui Choi, and Roblio Darte, the chained area effect attacks unleashed by Galen Merrick, the sustained barrage of Force lightning poured into his chest panel by Starkiller, and his own redirected Kinetype blast against Luke Skywalker. Furthermore, he was blindsided by Sui Choi's lightsaber throw, Sha Kun's electroshock net, Celeste Morn's Force push, Anya Kuro's plant surge, and the assortment of unconventional weapons leveled against him by the cyborg Stas Zix. Furthermore, Darth Vader was ultimately unable to completely extinguish the light side within him, his denial and insecurity about this inability to fully commit to the dark side providing an inroad for psychological manipulation. The Darth Maul doppelganger on Kalikar 6 aggressively taunted Vader by questioning his worthiness as a Sith Lord, goading him into an indignant rage, with Vader ultimately admitting that the hatred fueling his power was largely directed at himself. Luke Skywalker similarly questioned Vader's commitment to the dark side, but instead by appealing to his compassion and encouraging him to let go of his hatred. The moment of truth came when Luke Skywalker ultimately rejected the dark side and refused Sidious's offer of Sith apprenticeship, and Darth Vader was forced to watch as Sidious slowly tortured Luke to death with Force lightning. Unwilling to stand by while his son was murdered, Anakin Skywalker attacked and killed Emperor Palpatine, casting the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith into a reactor shaft on board the Death Star too, but enduring a fatal barrage of Force lightning in the process. However, the Jedi Skywalker's reawakening as a lightsider allowed him to transcend the physical plane as a Force spirit upon his death. And a night shall come, a battle will be fought, and the prisoners will go free, so saith the poem of ages. Morgan Katarn possessed the Force potential to fulfill the Ruusan prophecy, but as he was never trained, he became the knight who never was. Instead, the responsibility of freeing the Jedi and Sith spirits trapped by Lord Khan's thought bomb a millennia prior fell to his son Kyle. As an officer cadet at the Cliffside Academy, his Force connection first began to manifest itself during his Omega exercise, where he experienced premonitions that allowed him to save the lives of several of his squad mates. Katarn's first true awakening took place during his graduation ceremony, which was quietly presided over by High Inquisitor Jarek, his hands still warm with Morgan Katarn's blood. When Jarek pinned Kyle's Medal of Valor to his chest, Kyle experienced an abrupt surge of awareness, becoming attuned to every life form and object throughout the Cliffside Academy parade ground, and feeling the all-consuming hunger within Inquisitor Jarek. Katarn signed on as a rebel agent almost immediately afterwards, and became increasingly adept at instinctively accessing various minor abilities. Kyle Katarn's impromptu Jedi training began when he was contacted by the spirit of Master Ku Ron, a connection that was sealed when Morgan posthumously bequeathed Ron's lightsaber to his son. As the race to find the Valley of the Jedi brought Kyle into conflict with both Jarek and his Dark Jedi followers, Katarn was forced to develop quickly. Furthermore, his growth was accelerated by the memory flashes he received from the ancient Jedi Tal. However, Kyle spent his entire career as a Jedi playing fast and loose with the dark side, carrying the desire to avenge his father's murder and displaying a sense of hubris in his early battles. He allowed Maw to goad him into striking down a defenseless opponent in anger, struck down Baka Seka with the Spear of Midnight Black, and was successfully seduced by the Darkside Nexus on Dromund Kaas, wallowing in the power radiated by the Sith Temple. Ultimately, he was unwilling to fully commit to the dark side of the Force, and relented when confronted by Mara Jade. Already engaged in a reciprocal apprenticeship with the former Imperial assassin, this disturbingly close brush with the dark side motivated Kyle to formally join Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. However, the fall of two of his fellow students rattled Katarn so much that he chose to end his training, turning in his lightsaber and cutting himself off from the Force. However, this phase of his life was brought to a violent end when he was targeted by Desan and his reborn followers. Using the Valley of the Jedi Nexus to reawaken his Force connection, Kyle assisted the new Jedi Order against the Reborn, permanently joining the Order in the conflict's aftermath, and ultimately coming into his own as a Jedi Battle Master. Between his background as a soldier and rebel operative, and his training as a Jedi Guardian and Weapon Master, Kyle Katarn clearly emphasized the use of control branch abilities to enhance his martial arts. Heightened reflexes and perception not only enabled his lightsaber skills, but also fed into his use of conventional ranged weaponry. Active Force jumps and Force speed allowed him to rapidly cover ground and outflank opponents. Given his history of injuries, Kyle was no doubt instinctively drawing upon the Force to accelerate his recovery, bouncing back from a starship crash quickly enough to engage Saris in a serious lightsaber duel. By the time of his battle with Desan, he was capable of actively healing non-critical wounds on the fly. Furthermore, he developed a full and comprehensive mastery of energy-based Force abilities, using specialized applications of Tutaminis to neutralize Force attacks and conventional weaponry, depicted as successfully absorbing Force destruction blasts from Baka Seka and Jarek within gameplay. On the topic of Force destruction, Kyle unleashed this power against Mara Jade within the Dromund Kaas Temple, and even afterwards continued to make liberal use of Force lightning, striking down enemy groups with withering storms of energy. From the beginning, Kyle made avid use of his sense talents, demonstrating highly developed empathic and precognitive perceptions. As already mentioned, he used them to enhance his combat skills, a notable example being his use of precognition to gun down Imperial TIE fighters in an aerial pursuit over Sulan. He has received projective telepathic messages from both Kuran's Force Spirit and Inquisitor Jarek, in addition to the extensive memory imprint from the ancient Jedi Tal, gaining what amounted to a downloaded knowledge of Ruusan-era Jedi lore and techniques. He demonstrated an immediate ability to trade mental strikes with Saris, and successfully mind-tricked a Stormtrooper commando. Though Gork, Pick, Ma, and Bok all successfully ambushed Kyle with Force concealment, his active Force probe was sufficient to penetrate such cloaks, providing that he is aware that he is being stalked. Furthermore, he himself employed Force concealment. During his sojourn on Dromund Kaas, Kyle employed projective telepathy and illusions in his attempt to conscript Mara Jade to the dark side. As with most Force wielders, including Darth Vader, Kyle Katarn's primary Alter Branch ability was Telekinesis, initially used for combat utility but later as a lethal weapon in its own right. He demonstrated a multi-ton lifting strength when he halted falling debris from a collapsed ceiling on Vajun, and an ability to penetrate the Force defenses of similarly powerful adepts when he manhandled Tavion Aximus on Bespin. Kyle's range of telekinetic applications included Force Push, Force Pull, Force Grip, and Force Throw, particularly favoring lightsaber throws. Furthermore, during his brief stint on Dromund Kaas, he displayed control over levitating platforms within the temple. However, I would consider Katarn's most impressive feat of external influence being his use of a protective light-side cocoon as an improvised Sever Force against Inquisitor Jarek, neutralizing the additional power Jarek drew from the Valley of the Jedi Nexus by blocking Jarek's access to the dark side. Despite his initial commitment to the light side, and ironically given Kuran's black and white worldview, Kyle Katarn's emphasis on the key importance of knowledge led him to regard the distinction between light and dark as an arbitrary classification that got in the way of deeper understanding. In combat, he relied on Force intuition to inform his conduct and strategy, waiting for the opportune moment to employ his powers. A utilitarian who emphasized tactical subversion, he worked to isolate opponents and undercut their advantages, alternating between nuanced Jedi techniques and brutal dark-side combat to bypass the adversary's defenses. However, despite his willingness to venture into the shadows, Kyle understood the seductive influence of darkness and worked hard to maintain his self-discipline. Having spent his early career as a Jedi being pitted against more powerful opponents, Kyle Katarn was forced to endure numerous Force attacks, soaking up a Force push from Yun on Sulan, a Force destruction blast from Jarek on Ruusan, disorienting mental strikes from Pick and Saris, a telekinetic thrashing from Desan on Artus Prime, and getting blindsided by Tavion Aximus's Force Lightning and Telekinesis on Vajun. However, Katarn proved to be a quick study, retaliating in kind against Saris, striking down Baka Seka with Darkshear, disrupting Jarek's Dark Force connection with Lightside Protection, blasting Mara Jade with Force Destruction, manhandling Tavion with Force Grip, and successfully engaging a Force Nexus-empowered Desan. Though highly experienced at contending with opposing Force adepts, Kyle Katarn would ultimately come up short against Darth Caedus, who used many of Kyle's own tactics against him. Kyle's Jedi Strike team began their attack with simultaneous waves of rocket-propelled flash grenades and gas grenades rolled in with telekinesis. Though Caedus blocked the gas grenades, his trooper support was neutralized by the flashbangs, allowing the Jedi to engage him individually. Though Katarn kept up the pressure with lightsaber combat, he failed to prevent Caedus from using his Force abilities, and failed to blindside him with a lightsaber throw. Instead, Kyle misinterpreted Caedus's outthrust arm, responding with Force deflection to neutralize a Force push, only to be blindsided by the military speeder Caedus had Force pulled into his back, hurling him into Caedus's extended lightsaber blade. He remained conscious long enough to beg Seha Dorvald to leave him behind, but really wasn't in any position to argue when she reaffirmed her intention to extract everyone alive. Kyle Katarn ultimately made a full recovery, and Dorvald successfully planted a tracking beacon on Caedus, trading a short-term defeat for a long-term strategic advantage. Despite their opposing beliefs and alignments, Darth Vader and Kyle Katarn had a great deal in common. Both were decidedly non-traditional Jedi whose training began under unusual circumstances and at a much later age than normal. Both spent the duration of their careers playing fast and loose with the dark side of the Force, and when they finally declared their allegiances, both remained colored by their experiences on the other side. In a practical sense, Vader's cybernetic overhaul prevented him from employing the traditional Sith powers of energy manipulation and sorcery, restricting him to conventional telekinesis and telepathy, leaving him with the strengths and limitations of a traditional Jedi Knight. Katarn, on the other hand, resembled a Sith assassin, his foundation in conventional warfare followed by his forced development as a Force wielder, neatly paralleling the progression of Sith training under the Rule of Two depicted in the novel Darth Plagueis. With their common emphasis on martial combat and their mixture of light and dark side abilities, I would characterize both combatants as Dark Jedi Guardians. Starting from the top with an overview of their control branch abilities, their respective uses of physical enhancement were dictated by their respective physicalities, Vader's cybernetics reinforcing his augmented strength, while the unaltered Katarn could make full and sustained use of heightened acrobatics and speed in a way that Vader simply couldn't. With Force Heal, Kyle could mitigate injuries but only to a certain point, where Vader, despite his failure to permanently regenerate his lungs, could use rage-fueled healing to sustain himself in combat, even in situations where his life support has been disabled. With energy manipulation, this dynamic is reversed, with Vader restricted to minor Force deflections, while Katarn made unrestricted use of both Tutaminis and lightning. While I don't believe that Kyle's Force Lightning is powerful enough to one-shot Vader, it is enough to make his prosthetics seize up in combat, and the stacking damage from multiple bursts will become more and more of a problem as the fight drags on. Moving on to Sense Branch abilities, both Darth Vader and Kyle Katarn relied on Force perception to inform their strategies and conduct, a favored tactic of both being to use information gleaned about the opponent as ammunition for verbal manipulation. However, appropriately for a student of Dun Mok, Vader's methods were quite invasive, dredging up secrets with active telepathy, whereas Kyle's methods were comparatively passive, picking up on anything that the opponent failed to hide. Additionally, both combatants have used mental manipulation in an offensive capacity to subvert opponents, the difference being that Vader sought to break his adversary's will with mind domination and projective telepathic taunts, where Katarn attacked his opponent's equilibrium with disorienting mental strikes and the potentially lethal Dark Shear. Lastly, both have employed Force Cloak to ambush opponents, and both have been ambushed in turn by it, but Katarn has demonstrated the ability to penetrate such shrouds when he's aware he's being stalked, whereas Vader failed to penetrate Luke Skywalker's concealment on board the second Death Star, despite successfully probing Luke's thoughts. While I don't believe that mental manipulation will play a decisive role in this contest, as I find the idea of Vader mind-dominating Kyle to be just as unlikely as that of Kyle striking Vader down with a Spear of Midnight Black, but it will factor in, as I consider both combatants to be on a level playing field in this arena. The primary Alter Branch power favored by both was telekinesis, and it is here that the disparity in power most visibly expresses itself. Though I would argue that their similar ranges of application point to an equal level of developed skill, Vader consistently demonstrates greater magnitude. Kyle has not replicated Vader's greatest feats, and feats that Kyle struggles to accomplish, Vader can perform with comparative ease. That being said, Kyle's skill is not to be underestimated, his calculated, Kenobi-esque applications of power allowing him to get the biggest bang for his buck, and I view him as powerful enough to resist Vader's strangleholds. Intriguingly, both Darth Vader and Kyle Katarn have demonstrated various alternative abilities fueled by external sources of power. Though none of these powers will actually factor into this analysis, they do highlight the differences in force potential between the two. In Vader's case, the various force artifacts that he has encountered have provided a glimpse of the terrifying power that he could have wielded had his defeat on Mustafar not taken place, whereas the abilities that Katarn accessed through the Dromund-Kaas Nexus were powers that he remains technically capable of learning, but that he ultimately rejected due to his unwillingness to truly commit to the dark side. However, both possess one element within this field that cannot be so easily written off, those being Darth Vader's Sith Amulet and Kyle Katarn's knowledge of Sever Force. In Vader's case, though the amulet no doubt heightened his force power level, its exact effects are unknown. With Kyle, we have a pretty clear idea of what he can do with Sever Force, but I would argue that he was probably drawing energy from the Valley of the Jedi to enable this feat. The difference between Darth Vader and Kyle Katarn as Force wielders is the same as their differences in every other area. Vader is stronger overall, but Katarn is strong enough to have a foot in the door, and he has none of Vader's limitations. Physically, Vader possesses superhuman strength and resiliency, but Kyle has experience contending with these attributes, and he isn't saddled with impaired mobility. With martial arts, Vader possesses a stronger core technique, having clearly mastered Jensaarai to a higher level, but Kyle's strong style is sufficient to allow him to stand his ground, and he can make unrestricted use of his full range of techniques in a way that Vader simply can't. With the Force, Vader is more powerful, but Katarn matches his developed skill, and he has Force Lightning. This equal and opposite balance of strength versus flexibility means that both combatants are hitting each other right where it hurts, a dynamic that is heightened by their commonalities as well as their differences. Both combatants were counter-centric duelists who excelled against aggressive opponents, but had difficulties subverting defensive foes who used their own tactics against them, best demonstrated by their respective defeats at the hands of Luke Skywalker and Darth Caedus. However, my ultimate conclusion is this. Both possess devastating advantages and crippling vulnerabilities against one another, but Katarn has more advantages and fewer vulnerabilities. Taking a leaf from Antoine Bandelet's playbook, my projection for how this fight would play out will be broken down into the early fight, the mid-fight, and the late fight. As I see it, this contest is unlikely to be resolved in the early fight, which would instead consist of cautious offensive probing from both combatants, a mutual assessment resembling Vader's opening exchange with Luke Skywalker on Bespin. The mid-fight is where things would intensify, as both combatants start cycling through fighting styles and breaking out their alternative skills. Though Vader's focused lightsaber technique and sheer force power are sufficient to overcome Katarn's defenses, that's only if he manages to corner him, and Kyle is versatile enough to keep Vader from pinning him down, while in return confounding the Sith Lord's defenses. This phase of the battle resembling Vader's confrontation with Galen Marek on board the Death Star. Given that Vader is ultimately a heavily armored melee tank, his best chance of winning is instead to drag this battle into the late fight, dominating Kyle through attrition just as he did old Ben Kenobi. Between these two potential outcomes, I view a Jedi victory in the mid-fight as being the most likely, if only just. Kyle simply has more options, and all of them in combination allow him to grind Vader down more quickly than Vader can grind him down. Darth Vader simply isn't as flexible a combatant as Darth Caedus. However, I have to stress that I view Katarn's advantage as being by a very slim margin, as Vader's threat level cannot be understated, and all of Kyle's potential victories are merely by the skin of his teeth. But, be that as it may, I declare Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn the victor.